Good morning, everyone. A wonderful talk to kick off the morning, and I hope to continue that trend. And what better way to get everyone going in the morning than to talk about the history of taxation in Oklahoma. So this is a little background. I would not force this on anyone for more than a few minutes. But I'm going to talk about a collection of maps that were produced by the Oklahoma Tax Commission. And the Tax Commission was established in 1931, which is significant when you think of the fact that the Great Depression began just before that time. And the commission is charged with the collection, but also of statewide taxes, but also assisting localities and especially county assessors when it comes to the assessment and collection of property tax. And something that you could probably guess just from the general devastation that the Great Depression and Dust Bowl had on the national economy, but especially Oklahoma's economy, which is already for the decade prior to the beginning of the Depression, Oklahoma's economy was struggling mightily, the agricultural economy in particular. But the Depression resulted in a truly drastic reduction in terms of tax revenue, especially property taxes. So if you can look here, this is a diagram showing tax collection from 1925 to 1935. This is actually from the Tax Commission's second biennial report. So this is from 1934. And you can see right here what I've highlighted is property tax. So let's zoom in a little bit so you can actually see what's going on here. And you can see those last couple years, and that last data point is 1935. You can see the estimated revenue from the ad valorem tax, so from property taxes, shrinks to nearly nothing in 1935. And as I'm sure some of you are aware, property tax, very generally speaking, is highly responsible, is a huge component of local funding for schools and all sorts of other county and municipal functions across the United States, but especially in Oklahoma. And another interesting component here is if you look at these other taxes that basically started in 1933, you can see Oklahoma didn't have a sales tax until 1933. And you can see beverage tax, cigarette tax. And that's, you can more or less see there's this swap in revenue source from the ad valorem tax, but also way down on the chart towards the beginning, you would see the income tax, which was at this point a pretty tiny little sliver. But the thing with sales tax, as I think now know, is that it is a quite regressive tax. And the effect of transferring the tax burden from property holders paying property tax to just everyone who's buying food and other goods needed to live can be difficult. But the sales tax, it turns out, I think roughly a dozen states introduced the sales tax in 1933. So that was sort of the beginning of an era for taxation. So why was there this plummet in tax revenue? Well, urban unemployment approached 35% at this point in Oklahoma, just an enormous number. And farm incomes dropped more than nearly 2/3, another enormous number. But then also the Homestead Exemption. And this is another incredibly boring but important thing where, at least here in Oklahoma, landowners are able to exempt the first $1,000 of property value from their property tax, which nowadays comes out to a tiny amount. So you end up saving roughly $20 a year on your property tax thanks to the exemption. But at the time, $1,000 knocked off was a fairly large amount of revenue reduction. So there was this combination where the homestead exemption was meant to help small landowners and farmers grappling with the other losses that were incurred during the Depression and Dust Bowl, but also so that combined with this loss of other revenue to really place the state and counties and local municipalities in a real bind where they needed more revenue, but people were losing money. And you can just see how the Depression really asserted itself, because wherever you turned, there was just nothing to be had in terms of funds. There's a not working picture. It was really cool. I'll tell you. Let's just see if I can. Luckily, being a map collection. But this is a lantern slide created by the Soil Conservation the U.S. Soil Conservation Service in the mid-30s, and it's captioned "A typical abandoned field in Payne County, Oklahoma. Nearly 2 million acres are in this condition in the state of Oklahoma." And so this is, and you can really just see how in this image. Let me move the mic here. Oof. Okay, sorry. So that's a little taste of the devastation wrought during this time throughout the state. Spastically. So let's seamlessly. Oh, and now it shows up. That's fantastic. I don't know why that happened. Okay. Well, there you go. So there you can just see this is particularly when you think and this is Payne County, which is where Oklahoma State University is located. So this is for me a close to home thing where you could just travel and see land gone fallow, basically. So the project that the tax commission began was I think I misspelled assistance. They asked the Works Progress Administration to prepare a statewide set of land ownership and valuation maps. So this was a massive undertaking at the time. Land property tax assessment and valuation is strictly done at the county level, which produced a ton of problems in terms of how are assessors approaching assessment. How are they? What are they avoiding? What is not being assessed that needs to be assessed, and just all sorts of questions. But when it comes down to it, they're thinking there has to be money that we're missing out on, and so how can we improve that? And you can see here, this is from that same biennial report that I mentioned earlier, and really, there are better equalization of real estate assessments across the state and capturing revenue that has escaped taxation entirely. So this is not what probably people wanted to hear, but at the same time, for the functioning of the state itself, fairly necessary. So the way the maps are organized, there's one map per township for each of the 77 counties in Oklahoma. So that's 2,313 maps, roughly. No, exactly, in fact. So there's an example of one. You can see it's Township 17 North, Range 22 East. You can see there's Tahlequah, I didn't even mean to select that, but that just worked. I just love Tahlequah so much that, it's just fantastic. So you can see these maps. They show the name of the owner and the assessed value of the land and the improvements, and that land that is not assessed is clearly shown using diagonal lines. So here's a little zoom in, and you can see these are all hand-drawn, hand-drafted. You can see where the diagonal lines indicate that land is not assessed, and that usually either means that it's county-owned land, state land, federal land, or land owned by a member of a Native American tribal nation, or a descendant of a member of a tribal nation. So there are a whole lot of different aspects going into all this different land. And so, as you saw, we had this set of maps that they're really nicely organized by adhering to the Public Land Survey township. They're quite square. They are well bounded. So we undertook the georeferencing of all these maps. And georeferencing is taking these paper maps and applying real world coordinates to them so that they match with the existing GIS data that we have today. So basically what we were able to do is to take all 2,000 whatever of these maps and stick them into where they belong on the township. So you can see those red boxes indicate different townships, just nicely stuck together. But you can see we used, rather than trying to clip manually, what we did was we applied a model. Once the maps were georeferenced individually, we applied a model where it would use the shape of the township itself to clip out all of each map's marginalia, so taking out all the border and excess information in there. And this is something that's done like each iteration, as is generally done in GIS, it's done not to the original itself, but it's done to produce a byproduct. So this clipped version is not the sole version that we have, because that marginalia does contain a lot of interesting information, and particularly with the maps that are located in more highly populated areas, that marginalia is used in terms of labeling and things like that, just out of necessity. So then once all that overlap was removed, the individual maps were stuck together to create a mosaic. We had a mosaic for each of the 77 counties. Then you take all 77 of those mosaics, stick them together, produce a tile data set of, should have counted how many tiles there were. I'm not sure off the top of my head. But basically what we resulted with is taking that set of over 2,000 maps. We produced a single continuous statewide layer depicting land ownership and value in all of Oklahoma's rural land at this time, roughly 1936. So what's next? Let's make some data. So what we did next was I developed a pretty basic web application that would allow anyone. You can do it totally anonymously. You can log in if you wanted to record your score, if you're that sort of person. But what you can do is, see here, you can click draw some shapes on the map, and it'll zoom you to a random section. And what you do is click draw a new shape, not look it up on the dictionary. And let's do Claiborne Pickens here. And what you do is figure out how to use a new trackpad. But you basically draw the shape. And then what you do is enter in the information. So that's Pickens. Claiborne, value, we leave that. Is it marked with an X? Yes. And now you see that shape has been added there. So if I zoom out, not look on the dictionary, oh, it's just a disaster. Don't mind that. Back to full screen. What I'm trying to show, all of these red boxes here show transcriptions that have already been created. So right now I think we're at roughly close to 120,000 of those individual land holdings that have been transcribed in this manner. And this is something that up to this point has mainly been done by students who work for me in the Maps and Spatial Data department at OSU. It's something that during the pandemic has served extremely well as a source of work so that my students could continue to get paid while we were unable to work in person. It provided, and the georeferencing also, that was something that they did remotely. So it was an extraordinary a source of work, which is just as a supervisor, that's something that's always good to have for students, is something for them to work on, something extremely productive, and also just something to that is the end result, because they can see what they are accomplishing in real time. And I just want to mention, if you look at the Panhandle, the western part of the state, and that whole continuous area, the western part of the state, that's one student who's done all of that. She's done, out of the 120,000 records, she's responsible for over 50,000 of them. She is just unbelievable, and there's I have no idea why she's so good at it, but she is just an absolute machine. Like she would just do hundreds in an hour. It's truly remarkable. So in addition to drawing all those shapes, you can also choose to review shapes that have already been created. So this is sort of a crucial part of any crowdsourcing project. If any of you are familiar with the Zooniverse project, this is a very common approach where you have data creation or entry, and then you have other participants review that data creation for accuracy. So what you do is select review. It'll take you to a random already drawn feature, and it'll ask you to confirm, is the spelling right? Are the numbers transcribed correctly? Is it correctly identified as either exempt or non-exempt? And then you say, yes, it looks great, or you just go ahead and edit it right there. And then there on the database side of things, it says, okay, this one's been checked once, twice, 3 times. And my idea is that each shape will be eventually checked something like, I'm thinking 5 times. And then once it's hit that 5th review, it will be removed from the review pool and will be considered sort of gold standard, ready to go. That's a long ways away, but that's my hope for the future. So if you want to learn more about the maps, I have a couple links here. This is that top link just goes to the library's website that I've created for this. I have a story map that I created showing the history of these maps and talking a bit more about the WPA, but also the WPA in Oklahoma, how its efficacy was generally pretty limited due to the dysfunctional relationship between the state's governor at the time and the Roosevelt administration. So really hampering personal grudges, really hampering the ability of the WPA to deliver aid within the state through work and other things like that. And then also you can, the link there to contribute to the project if anyone wants to give it a shot. I'm always looking for new people. There are a number of, because right now I haven't advertised this that much, but there are people who have contributed, just random folks. And one of them has done about 10,000 shapes. And I just don't, I wish I could read, I didn't record, didn't put it in a way to really be able to reach out to people and say, hey, thanks, you're doing awesome. But if you happen to be in this room, thank you so much. So that's it. Or is it? And this is just a link to this talk so you can get to all the other links. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Kevin? Yes.
Yeah, there's actually a team of finance professors from Ohio State who reached out to me to see if they could get the preliminary data set, which I just obviously shared with them. This is all public and publicly available. And what their hypothesis is that, believe it or not, oil companies, so yeah, not the, maybe the, but the oil companies were more likely to site wells in places where land ownership was more homogeneous, whereas where land ownership is more fragmented, they think that it would be less likely. So this data set just absolutely perfectly fits their needs. And so what I learned, what they had been doing is using our maps and they have their own team of graduate students working on just creating like center points for the data. And so kind of I encouraged them to contribute to our project, but at the same time, they're using the georeference base layer to further their research. And so it's really, and I spoke with their team multiple times where we discussed ways I could improve the interface and things like that. And then also, I've also another researcher out from University of Washington, a computer science person reached out to see if I could share the data. And that's just, I think, an example of how a large-ish spatial data set can be useful for, I don't know, practicing algorithms or whatever. I didn't really talk with that person as much. But yeah. Any other questions?
All right, thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you.